All right. We'll just wait for a second. Right, you can go and start now. Bismillah.
Excellent. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting, I think these days annual NZF IFG Zakat Masterclass. And the master, I think, is Mufti Faraz here. The class is represented by me. And the idea here, inshallah, will be that we will be giving a bit of a whiz through on how you calculate your zakat from start to finish, and then particularly double clicking on some of the, I guess, investment assets or business assets that often get a lot of questions, particularly those that have come up, I guess, in the last couple of years, where people are still finding their feet in terms of how exactly you figure out zakat with respect to them. And I'm talking in particular about cryptocurrency, NFTs, and Web 3.0, metaverse. Mufti Faraz, I have to tell you, Mohsin Patel has set his our internal Slack profile to this awful picture of a psychonaut ape that has a blonde wig or a blonde hair. And so the first time that he gave me a call, it was like literally one of the most alarming moments of my life, because the picture props up and it's like, this person is calling you. So I guess we'll figure out if Mohsin
He's embraced Web3 wholeheartedly, hasn't he?
He certainly has. He certainly has. Brilliant. And guys, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Mufti Faraz is a Mufti. He's one of the leading authorities in Zakat and Islamic finance, alhamdulillah, globally these days. And he has a traditional training in the Islamic sciences, but also has qualifications from a conventional perspective as well. He's got qualifications in accounting, and has written, I think, a few books now on Islamic finance and a few other topics, and there are more coming out. I think one is coming out soon on NFTs as well. So, inshallah, we're in very good hands with that respect. So without further ado, Mufti Saab, I'm going to turn to you firstly to, I guess, welcome you. And then also, I'd love to, for you to kick off and tell us a little bit about, why is this whole thing so important? Why is zakat so important?
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Look, it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you as well. MashaAllah, those who don't know Ibrahim, he's also one of those people I really admire, and his track record for his age. I don't want to disclose your age here, but I think it's something for people to check up themselves. He's achieved so much, and may Allah continue to bless you and take work from you, and allow us all to continue to benefit from your writings, from your podcasts, and whatever else you do, because you're doing many things. I mean, look, zakat is something so important, right? Zakat is not just a payment. I think that's the most important thing to digest for people, and digest might not be the best word right now because of fasting, but it's really something we have to think about. Zakat is not just a payment. Zakat begins with a payment, right? Zakat, the payment is just a manifestation of zakat, but zakat, the pillar of zakat within Islam, represents an entire movement or an entire idea of community belonging, of empathy, or of having concern and care for those around you, of growth, of trying to build something together, right? So the pillars of Islam are not just actions, period. No, there's much more to that. Of course, it has to be. And so zakat is so much more than just a payment. Yes, the zakat, its manifestation is a payment, but it does so many things at so many levels. Every pillar of Islam has a vertical and a horizontal. The vertical is between you and Allah, right? How it gets you close to Allah, how it unlocks barriers of recognition to Allah, right? Zakat unlocks those economic barriers that we have between us and Allah. But then there's also a horizontal between us and the people. Because what is zakat all about? Zakat is, from an economic perspective, think about it, it's liquidity. Zakat is unlocking wealth that's just sitting there, allowing movement in the economy. And Ibrahim, your background, I'm sure you've done a PPE as well from Oxford, right? So you're best placed to speak about the economic kind of And you've written, I think, for Financial Times, if I'm not mistaken, as well, right? An article on this aspect of it being a wealth tax and how it plays in the economy. And yeah, so I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that, because I think it's really important just to understand zakat from a wider perspective to give a wholesome meaning to what zakat is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, we often in this kind of capitalistic landscape think of this the economy as just private sector and public sector, and we really kind of ignore what's called the third sector, because I think if you're in this kind of secular framework, the third sector is almost just there to kind of make you feel good and, you know, tick a box and, you know, have like a bit of like a brand kind of strength from doing good stuff. But in Islam, it's such a core part of an economy. Like, I think there was large parts of the Muslim world that actually were awqaf property or were, you know, sadaqah property. And I think that, you know, that then means that we should have a real degree of seriousness and thought to how we approach this entire sector, because if it is actually such an important part of the overall economy, but we're kind of now, you know, treating it as, you know, just a kind of like frivolous activity or something that we kind of give and make ourselves feel good, then actually, you know, a third of the economy or a huge portion of the economy then is going to be, you know, determined by that attitude, which I don't think that's right. So yeah, I think it's so important. I also think that you know, and I think Mufti Sahib, you've done research at NZF, done research around this about how if people actually paid the right zakat that they were supposed to pay, then, you know, poverty would get sorted out almost instantaneously. So yeah, I think those were my initial thoughts around the kind of macro picture.
Yeah, I mean, some estimates, if it's very conservative, point towards a 300 billion US dollars of zakat per annum, right? And that's a conservative view. Others up to 1 trillion US dollars annually. So we know how much that can solve in the world if it was paid properly, distributed properly, and efficiently. So zakat has so much to offer. Of course, we as individual payers, we're concerned with calculation, we're concerned with making sure we do it correctly and pay properly. But there's much more to the story of zakat than just a payment. And that's the truth. You know, storytelling is a very powerful, Ibrahim's very good at this as well, right? His videos. But storytelling is very powerful. But the truth is, in Islam, there's so much story there. Allah has given us so many things. And zakat is a story in and of itself. There's an entire vision and a goal that we're trying to aspire towards. And so we have to keep that bigger picture in sight and make sure that we do this step by step properly, which is a calculation, but then make sure that the entire value chain of zakat is being, I would say, managed properly and efficiently.
100%. And Mufti Saab, I guess before we get into the meaty subject, or the you know, the interesting stuff around the assets, how like from first principles does like the you know, the what's the spinal column of zakat calculation? So we have that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, look, calculation. If you're thinking from like a spinal column perspective and like the underpinning of the entire calculation, zakat works on those assets which are designated for exchange, right? And there's a reason to that. It's not on those things which are, you know, very illiquid or for personal use. It's typically on those things which are designated for exchange, hence money, right? Receivables, trade assets. Naturally, they're designated for exchange, because if you're not exchanging these things need to be exchanged for the economy to work. Because look, what is the economy? An economy is made up of a transaction. What's a transaction? A transaction is a medium of exchange and a good or product, right? That's really the nuts and bolts of an economy and transaction. So these things need to be exchanged for the economy to function properly and for it to be working. If these things are not being exchanged, there's fear of recession, right? And so what zakat does is, look, these things are designated for exchange. They should be exchanged. If they're not being exchanged, if they're being hoarded or kept, zakat makes sure they are being exchanged, because zakat is an exchange, right? So it's really pumping liquidity back in the market, making sure things are. And remember, zakat, unfortunately, we have kind of clustered zakat in the month of Ramadan, right? But we know that zakat is an all year round activity. I might be liable to pay my zakat in Shawwal or in Dhul Hijjah, right? It's not necessary I pay zakat is obligatory on Ramadan. And funnily enough, there must be something wrong if all of us have become owners of nisab on the first of Ramadan. Something's gone wrong somewhere, but it doesn't matter. Like, let's make sure we just do it properly now. But really, you should be owner of nisab anytime in the year, right? So the idea is that there's continuous liquidity, continuous payments being made, and these assets which were designated, designed for exchange purposes are still moving. They're not kept or hoarded. And the beauty of in Islam is Allah has made it so easy that you're just shaving off or trimming off 2.5% of the asset itself. So it's not a burden upon you where you have to go do something extra to pay the zakat. No, it's just trim off 2.5% of the asset that you have and you pay. And it's not even on capital goods or fixed assets. Because if it was, right, think about the damage it would be due to a business, right? If zakat was due on the capital goods, on the income generating assets. So if I had an Uber taxi, right, I was a taxi driver, and if zakat was on the car itself, right, what would I do? I'd have to like liquidate the car, or I'd take out the engine and give the engine, right? I'm finished. But zakat doesn't work like that. Zakat is only on certain elements, and that's the kind of things which are easy to pay and which are beneficial for people.
100%. I guess that comes back to the point around the wealth tax and this discussion around that, because the reason why modern economies are thinking about it is because often, really wealthy people, they are asset rich and they don't necessarily have huge amounts of income. And so what happens is that, you can just essentially hoard that money and stagnate it, and it doesn't really get the velocity of that money going through the system. Whereas for Muslims, there's that verse in the Quran as well, isn't there? About how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants it to be, wants wealth to be circulated through the wider society, and we've got an inbuilt fiscal policy or an inbuilt monetary policy, which means that Muslims are encouraged to put their money into entrepreneurial growth things. Like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have put it into, could have made us pay zakat on things that are, fixed goods or, capital assets, but He hasn't done that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't done that. And it indicates to us that actually, if someone is just doing everything completely entrepreneurial and he just doesn't happen to have that much cash, then that in itself is a contribution towards society that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to kind of protect. So I thought that was quite a fascinating thought that came to me as I was thinking about it.
Right? Just to add further to the point that you made, right? We know the hadith about the Messenger of Allah mentioning that don't, or invest in the money of the orphans so that zakat doesn't eat, that zakat doesn't eat that wealth up, right? So even there, clearly we have a directive to use the funds in an entrepreneurial investment way, because that if you are investing in zakatable assets, zakat is going to eat it up anyway, right? So it's almost as if the text is telling us to use it in capital goods, fixed assets in a way which generates more income, right? Preserves the value, but at the same time mitigates the zakat that comes as a result, right? So it goes back exactly to what you're saying, that there's an entire push towards using the money that we have for the greater good. Because look, in Islam, we're not just becoming wealthy for wealth's sake. That philosophy doesn't exist in Islam. We have a purpose for our wealth. Of course, Islam and Sharia wants us to fulfill our needs, be self-sustainable, have our own dignity. That's without a doubt. But then amassing wealth for just wealth's purpose, or amassing wealth and nothing else, also is not part of the Islamic framework. There's always the wealth is there for us to gain more in the akhirah, ultimately, because that's the real life. What's the point of amassing wealth in a temporary life, and that wealth is not even going to stay with you? It doesn't make sense.
Absolutely, it makes complete sense. What you're saying, Mufti Saab. For those of you who've just joined or watching the streams on the various different social media channels, please do feel free to share this conversation with others in your family and friends. Inshallah, we will be taking questions as well, so please do keep them coming and turning to them as well. And I guess I'll be diving in shortly into them. So Mufti Saab, in terms of, now you've got someone, I don't know, Khalid, who's living in Preston, and he's now ready to figure out his zakat and approach it. What should he be doing, and where should he be going, and how should he kind of do the practical stuff? And then I guess we'll go into the questions, and I'm sure those will clarify lots of things.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way for most people nowadays to work out the zakat, I would say, is just use an online calculator. I think that's probably the easiest way. It's available at a touch of a button. NZF UK have a phenomenal calculators. Likewise, IFG have a calculator, right? And what you've calculated almost £100,000, I believe, right? And 60,000 has been donated through you, right? So, mashallah, that's brilliant work. So look, there's calculators available online for people to use. Use the calculators just step by step. It doesn't mean you have to do the whole thing in 1 hour. That's not necessary. What's necessary is just follow the process, trust the process, follow the process, and whatever information you need whilst working it out. There's always, like on the IFG calculator, on the NZF calculator, there's always information available on the page somewhere where you can read more. And if not, NZF UK have consultation services, so you can always book a call with a mufti to speak through your particular query, and we'll assist you, inshallah, and that's not a problem.
Excellent. And I think the final question I had, Mufti Saab, before we get into the questions themselves is, how does one balance between the zakat aspect and the sadaqah aspect? Is that like a mindset thing, or are there any like 50 things to keep in mind as well for people when they're thinking about that this Ramadan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always tell people that charity begins at 2.5%, right? Zakat is not 2.5%, right? Charity is not 2.5%, right? Charity begins at 2.5%. So zakat is a payment you have to make. Don't perceive of that as charity, right? That's just an obligatory payment. Yes, it's charitable output, it's charitable activity, but for us, it's something much more than that. Because when we use the word charity, donations, we relegate zakat to a very, kind of like donation, charitable type thing in our mind. Because words are very powerful. The way you label something has a great impact on the way we perceive things. So sadaqah we should be using and paying sadaqah in Ramadan and all year round, really. But the problem is, because we've conflated the two, we treat zakat as charity and sadaqah. Many of us don't pay sadaqah, or very little, right? Whereas our parents and grandparents and the earlier generations, there was so much giving of sadaqah. It was very common for them to have like a box at home and put £1 in and empty that out, right? So I would say to people, look, have your zakat, give your zakat strategically wherever you want. That's your thing, right? You have that choice. There's a lot of guidance available online where you want to give it to. But wherever you give your zakat, that's your personal choice at the end of the day. But sadaqah, by all means, support all the causes you can. Whoever comes to you, wherever they are, anything that comes your way. This is what I really like. I really take comfort in this idea that anything which comes in front of you, think of it as an invitation from Allah, right? Simple as that. If there's a sadaqah call, somebody shares a message with you, think of that as a call from Allah to you to give sadaqah, and act upon it then and there, right? Nowadays it's so easy. You can make payments literally with 2-3 clicks. So if any kind of call comes to you of sadaqah, give £1. What's £1 nowadays, right? Just give £1. Try and spread your money as much as you can. And then zakah, wherever you want to give, if you have a family member that's in need, fair enough. If you want to give to a local charity somewhere, fair enough. If you have some cause that you're affiliated to overseas and that that means something to you and dear to you, that's also understandable. So that's what I would say when it comes to zakah and sadaqah.
No, Jazakallah khair for that. Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, the way I'm thinking about it this Ramadan is I want to give, I guess, strategically for my zakat, make sure that I do that piece with, using my rational brain. But then I think it's really important to, keep your heart alive to the pain of those around you, and responding, because ultimately, we're human beings, and I don't think we should deny that and be completely like, rational robots. And Islam doesn't necessarily, like when the Quran talks about charity, it talks about emotions and feelings. About was that, there's verses about those who came to give, or those who were but they were turned away because they didn't have riding horses. And there's so many verses like that that's talking about وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. That's a really emotional, they're giving preference over themselves to other people, even though they are themselves in hardship. That's a deeply emotional thing. So like, I know we've written this charity clarity guide, which is very rational, but I was reflecting on that as well. And we've done a recent video, I don't know if that's been launched yet, or it will be, around making sure that this emotional connection is there. And I completely agree with you, Mufti Saab, that the way to do that is to be open to giving whenever it kind of presents itself. And I think especially the younger generation, if you're under 40, I would say whatever you plan to give, I would probably multiply that by about 5. And that's about what the older generation used to give. Because I was recently talking to my dad about this, and it was actually my mum was telling me about the various places that my dad gives, and it can be, it's a very humbling experience when you realize actually, you think that you might be doing something, but there's other people who are doing so much more than that. So yeah, I completely echo everything that you said.
I mean, one thing which, speaking with yourself, right, I thought that comes to mind is that we should treat charity and giving in general like we treat investing, right? And our approach to investments, because in a startup investment like yourself, and this is your expertise and forte, right? You become very much you invest yourself into that thing, right? You want to know exactly what's happening. You do a deep dive in the fundamentals of the business, what's happening, growth potential. You look at everything, and it becomes your night and day. You want to understand, be part of the journey, right? We should have the same approach to charity, right? If there's a project that you like, invest yourself, be part of that journey. It doesn't just mean you give your money and you walk away. Right? If you really want to add value, and you can, right? If you have other skill sets, put your time to it as well, right? Or work, or find out more from the charity what's actually happening. And I guess this is the disconnect that we have, and that's why we have so many complaints in the industry as well, or from payers, right, and donors. It's because we're just paying and we're walking away. But that's not the mindset we should have. We should be walking the journey with it. The charity is just like a vehicle. Right, we, the people who are donating and giving, should be the ones involved, right? Have that kind of like startup investing mindset.
Absolutely. Okay, so folks who are listening, please once again do feel free to share this with your friends and family. We're now going to get into the juicy stuff, Mufti Saab. And the very first question is as juicy as it gets. Humaid is asking, my zakat on Bitcoin was due in October when it peaked, and it would have been a lot for me, but now it's gone down. So can I pay the lesser price because I have a lot of other financial burdens?
Yeah, I mean, good question. So if your zakat year end, that's the day when you have to pay zakat, was last year when the value was really high, then that's the amount you'd have to pay, right, on the Bitcoin. Because at that particular date in the year, that was your net wealth and your net worth. So you'd have to pay zakat on that amount. If it's challenging right now, what you can do is enter into some kind of, unofficial, informal payment plan with yourself, and just commit to pay X amount every month, as little as it may be, but just have that commitment and clear in your mind that this is what I'm going to do to pay that zakat. And look, with Bitcoin, there's always hope in the future of it hitting those peaks again. That's not financial advice, by the way, disclaimer.
You should give that the donation and then make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to get Bitcoin to turn. Let me take another crypto-related question, and then perhaps Mufti Sahib, it might be a good moment to just generally talk a little bit about cryptocurrency in the first instance, and then we can pick up on some of the other areas that we mentioned as well. So the question from Junaid is, isn't crypto speculation and thus haram as an investment? And how do you pay zakat on a haram investment? And then another brother is asking, didn't play last year's zakat. I was into crypto. So what's the best approach to pay out with all the price here during I held it? So do I take just the highest price and give it out, or do I take the today's price? So I guess there's two questions. Well, I guess there's three questions. Isn't crypto speculation and haram? How do I pay zakat on a haram asset? And also, if I've held an asset for a period of time, what price do I go for when I pay zakat?
Yeah, no, good questions. Look, every investment is speculation, right? That's the reality. You're speculating on future values, and you're hoping for gain. Speculation in and of itself doesn't make anything prohibited. It's because the way speculation is used in the industry, in the financial industry, that's why we assume typically that means haram in Sharia. Speculation in and of itself is not a problem from a Sharia perspective. Well, the problem is what you're investing in, how you're investing. Those are the two key concerns that you should have. So just because an asset is very volatile, it doesn't mean that the investment is unlawful. I remember reading a statistic somewhere that 90% of businesses fail in the first 2 years or something, right? If that's the case, then if you're investing in a business, right, it's more likely than not, every chance is going to fail. Would that mean that investing in a business is not permissible? Of course not. Nobody would say that. So speculation is not a problem. But when is it a problem? It's a problem when you're investing in something unlawful, or the circumstances in which you're investing are unlawful. For example, you have dependents upon you. You need to look after their needs, right? You have expenses to pay. You have debts to pay. You've only got £1,000 and you start investing and put the whole £1,000 into Bitcoin, right? And you're not meeting your liabilities that you have and your expenses. Now that's a problem, right? But speculation is just taking a view, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's how you take the view and what you take the view with, okay? So that's the first question, I believe. Now, when it comes to how you calculate in the year, right? So when it comes to zakat, it's for the Hanafi, in the Hanafi approach, all you have to do is just be concerned of the value on your zakat anniversary, your zakat year end. That's all. You don't have to worry about the fluctuation whatsoever. As long as you have wealth equal to the nisab, the threshold or more, at zakat year end, your zakat anniversary, you have to pay zakat on it, regardless of what the value has been throughout the year. Yes, there are other views, like the Shafi'i school. They're of the view that zakat will be taken based on the lowest point in the year, because in that approach and calculation approach, it's about how much wealth you've held across the entire year. So the lowest amount is what you have held across the entire year, because the rest has been fluctuating. So they say zakat would be on that lowest point.
Jazakallah khair. And then Mufti Saab, so we've got this concept, where we're trying to figure out our zakatable assets. And zakatable assets, Sheikh Sohail, I was on a webinar with him actually very, very recently, a few hours ago, and he was talking about how it's money, gold, silver, and then trading stock is like kind of the heart of where, it's the liquid stuff that you would pay zakat on. And then you would take off the liabilities that you have due, and then the rest is what you would pay the zakat on, 2.5%. Now, my question is, with the rise of new kind of assets like cryptocurrency, how do you figure out what is zakatable from that? Because we've got money, gold, silver, trading stock. How does the cryptocurrency analysis fit into that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So what we need to do to understand crypto assets is understand why the classical text or the Sharia itself makes zakat binding on certain things, right? Firstly, zakat is not binding on everything. Zakat is limited to certain assets only, and there's a very clear rationale behind those assets. And the Sharia has designated certain types of assets for zakat purposes. Now we need to see, does that same reasoning and underlying principle apply to new assets? Wherever it applies, there'll be zakat on it. Wherever it doesn't apply, there'll be no zakat on it. That's why even when it came to fiat currencies, right, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, there was a huge debate among scholars whether it was zakatable. Because remember, fiat has gone through a journey in and of itself, right? First, this paper money, the IOU that we had, was backed by gold, right? Then it had a claim to a certain amount of gold. Then it became completely an independent asset in its own right. So in every phase of its journey, you'll find scholars in the last 100 years, especially from the Indian subcontinent, writing on the zakat treatment of this particular asset that's there. So with crypto assets, we do the same thing. We will look at what the Sharia has written in terms of the assets we know for certainty, and then we look at those assets which have a question mark hanging over them to understand, do they have any parallels with these assets? So what we do know with certainty is zakat is due upon anything which is a medium of exchange, right? Anything which is designated as a payment token or a payment system or a medium of exchange, that is zakatable always, right? Hence, any crypto asset that's designed to function as a P2P kind of payment system is zakatable. That's why Bitcoin will always be zakatable. That's its very function, is to operate as a medium of exchange. Okay. And just so to bring everybody on board, look, crypto is very simply is just a digital asset. That's all it is, right? What makes it a digital asset? Its use cases are in a digital ecosystem, right? That's where it lives there, it operates there, and it's valued in that sense, in that space. Okay. And to be honest, crypto and digital assets are now becoming the nuts and bolts of Web3, right? Web3, the digital infrastructure of Web3, I would say, is composed of three things at minimum: crypto assets, blockchain, and smart contracts. These three things are really, you could say, the bedrock of Web3 and everything that's happening in that space of the digital ecosystem. So crypto assets are key to that digital world and the functioning of that world, a very like decentralized, a trustless system that's being created. And at its very simple level, a crypto asset represents value in this digital space, and it can be programmed to function in multiple ways, right? So you have this, what I mentioned, the first type of token is a payment token, Bitcoin, right? That's always zakatable. Then you have different types of tokens. For example, you have a governance token. A governance token is a token which gives you the right to vote on a protocol, right? You want to have a particular say, take a vote on how things should be managed, because this is a decentralized platform. So the token holders will have a chance to vote. So this token will help you vote. For example, Maker is the MKR token. It's a governance token. Now, when it comes to zakat and these types of tokens, if you're not trading in this, there'll be no zakat because it doesn't fit within the earlier philosophy we discussed, right? Which was it has to be bought to resell, bought to exchange. If you're just holding this token because you want to be part of that ecosystem, you have an interest in that particular project, you want to have a vote and say in how the project grows, zakat will not be due, right? And then you have simple other types of tokens like platform tokens, like Ether, right? Again, as long as you're not trading in that, zakat will not be due upon it. Utility tokens like Filecoin, which is all about storage of data. As long as, again, you're not trading, there's no zakat due upon that. The interesting one is a security token, which is like equity, being a shareholder in your companies. Like it's just like same like an equity, right? Where you have an interest, an equity through this security token. It's just like your share certificate, in other words, right? So zakat will be due on that, depending on the underlying zakatable assets of a particular company.
Brilliant. Jazakallah khair for that, Mufti Saab. So someone might say, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I figure out, what on earth my tokens are? Is there like is there any practical advice that you'd give? Should they just use an approximation? Should they just like be cautious and give on the full amount? Or I guess for those who have larger amounts, perhaps they should do the analysis by going to the white papers. How practically do you approach that?
I mean, I would tell everyone, if you don't know what your token is, then something's gone wrong because you've not done your fundamental analysis of investing, right? And then you don't even know if it's Sharia compliant if you don't know what's going on, right? I think part of Sharia compliance, and we should be in the habit of doing analysis. It's key, right? You should have the kind of like, if you want to invest and gain, you should also put the time in, right? To understand what you actually, where you're putting your money, right? So you should be doing that kind of research. If you're not, then but as long as you know it's Sharia compliant, then most people nowadays, just from my kind of like engagement with the industry and people at large, it's most people are just trading, right? Very few people are like holding with. I don't know many people who come to me and said, I like Filecoin, I like the project, I want to be part of the ecosystem. I'm using Filecoin to store my data. So therefore, most people are trading, and therefore it might just be the sensible approach to pay zakat on the entire portfolio.
Yeah, sensible. I think that's probably what I'll end up doing, because we've side point, users may be interested in this. We've ended up with hundreds of cryptocurrencies because what I realized, because I use Binance, and we a long time ago we set up a referral code or something linked to our website, and Binance has this Byzantine system which no one really fully understands. I'm not even sure Binance fully understand it, and it turns out that we were getting paid referral doing a small portion of whatever cryptocurrency the person invested in.
Wow.
So one day I was just looking through my coins, and I was like, why do I have like 400-500 coins here? So and then I've left them just out of just for entertainment purposes. I've left them, as every so often one of the coins might like explode, and then it becomes like it goes into like from a few pence it goes to a few pounds or a few tens of pounds. So yeah, I think for us the analysis might be a bit tricky.
Yeah, so for you the safer thing is just to pay on the whole thing.
Yeah, I think so. Mufti Saab, let from the Zoom call as well. We've got cultural land is inherited. So I guess the first question is around agricultural land, and the second question is around inherited money. How do we approach that? And maybe whilst you're at it, you might as well deal with mining as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, look, when it comes to land, if it's your personal home, you're not trading in land, then land in and of itself is not zakatable. Yes, the produce could have zakat on it, right? So the kind of like what you're growing, depending where you're growing it as well, there's just some guidance around that, zakat guidance on these issues. If I would say consult a scholar with your particular case, but there is typically some zakat on agricultural produce. It depends on how you're irrigating it, and there's some details there. So maybe just escalate that query further. When it comes to, sorry, the second question you mentioned was on?
The second question was on inherited money.
Yeah, on inherited money or anything that's inherited, as long as you've not received it, the estate has not been distributed as of yet, then zakat is not due on any of it. Yeah, if you've received it, it's yours now, you own it, then you'll pay zakat on it.
Great, Jazakallah khair. And what about mining, and what about if you own, let's say, animals? I know this is pretty niche, but let's knock it on its head.
Yeah, so look, let's deal with animals first. So animals, right, it's very interesting. And animals are somewhat different to the way, I mean, there's some similarities, but differences to the way money and trade assets are understood. Because animals have their own kind of like payments, right, that are due. It's not 2.5%, okay? Rather, it's typically one animal, depending what it is. So if you have, it's typically cattle, your camels, your cows, and your sheep, right? Now, it just depends. So in sheep, for example, if you have 40, you give one. In camels, on 5, 10, 15, 20, right? You give different amounts of one sheep, two sheep, three sheep, four sheep. And then on I think on 25, you give a particular camel. So it has its own system, its own framework, but you do give, the idea is as well, like agriculture was an economy in and of itself, but it has its own kind of like, there's actual growth in units and size. And there'll also be an exchange because you're giving a sheep away, and that sheep, that item will potentially mate with another animal, and it'll also grow and increase the economy, right? So this idea of exchange is still there, but it's more distant than it is in trade assets and money. But it's animal livestock is another whole area when it comes to zakat, which we haven't really dealt with because I don't think it's so common in the UK. But it's definitely an interesting kind of like asset class, which I mean, it's something to invest in, which we don't invest in.
Maybe we should look into it. Maybe we should get Rizwan on it from Euro Quality Land.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe we should set up a Bakra fund or something.
I mean, look, land, look, from a real economy perspective, you have land, right, and animals, right? If you think about it, and property. These are the three things which asset classes which we haven't really addressed well here.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for folks who are tuning in now, we're just going through various different asset classes and thinking about how zakat is applying to it. And I've gone in hard with the most arcane of the asset classes, just to make sure Mufti Saab is getting a stress test. It's like Mufti Saab's zakat MOT going on right now. Because I have no idea about how you work out zakat on agriculture, on camels, and those are the bits of the fiqh books that I typically kind of skip over.
We have to memorize the entire payments for this, so I've memorized the entire thing in my head. So it gives me nightmares. I can still see the cows and camels.
Great. So shall we move on to I guess easier pastures, which is, do we have to pay zakat on an employee's provident fund? I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'm assuming, I guess you could approach it in two ways. One is, do you have to pay zakat on like a fund that you're investing in, or do you have to pay zakat on pensions?
Yeah, so these provident funds, they're typically found in India, Pakistan, and these countries and other countries overseas. I would just say, look, speak to your local scholars, because there's many types of these funds. I know scholars have from the subcontinent have typically written that there's no zakat on it because it's similar to our national insurance contribution and state pension. It's very much similar to a state pension. But if it's not the case, I mean, there's more nuance there potentially. Then yeah, if it's like a defined contribution schemes that we have in the UK where you're investing, or you have a SIP or something of this nature, then typically there would be zakat on it. So although the question is quite generic and broad, I would say raise the query to your local scholars and find out exactly the answer there.
And you mentioned pensions, so this is often something that's quite heavily debated. So we've got these two kinds of pensions: defined benefit pensions and defined contribution pensions. Defined benefit often are known as final salary pensions, but you don't actually own something or you don't have anything right now, but you will be given something upon retirement. And then defined contribution are also, I guess, similar to SIPs or private pensions, where you have something, you kind of can track your investment and you will get out of it whatever that investment ended up at. Now, the question is, how do you approach zakat on both of these kinds of pensions?
Yeah, so in the UK, the advice that most scholars who have researched into pensions they give is, when it comes to defined benefit schemes, there is no zakat on that. It's because you don't own anything as of yet. It's just a liability that's owed to you by your employer. It's future salary that'll be paid to you when you retire. So there's no zakat on that because it's a weak debt from a fiqh perspective. There's no zakat on that. When it comes to defined contribution schemes, how we've interpreted that particular kind of setup is, you do have an interest, you do own something, you can manage the fund. It's locked for your own benefit so that you don't use the money that's there for your best friend's wedding, right? Or for a holiday to like Mauritius. And it's kept there. The government want you to rely on your own money when you retire, basically. So it's locked. And if you try to access it, you'll be penalized, right? So you're disincentivized from using that money, and you'll only be using that money when you need it, and that's upon retirement. And the idea is try to beat inflation and try for it to retain its value in real terms when you retire. Now, how do you then treat that from a zakat perspective? Our view is that zakat is due upon that, but it's only proportionate because you're a shareholder of an investment fund, right? or you're a unit holder, right? Or you have an investment in a fund, and that fund has invested in multiple equities, right? Typically, if it's a Sharia compliant one, and by you owning equity, you're just a shareholder of a business, right? You're not trading. You're not trading in that particular fund. Rather, you're holding it for long term. You become a shareholder. So just like how you pay zakat on a business, a similar kind of approach would apply, whereby you pay zakat on the underlying zakatable assets in those companies. To make it easy for people, what we've done at NZF is we looked at like the 100 top pensions, and so we looked at what's like the asset composition of a property fund, what's like the asset composition of a mixed asset fund, of an equity fund, of a Sharia fund, of a fixed income fund, and we created proxies. So if you're interested in working out the zakat on your particular type of pension, what I would suggest is go on the NZF UK website, and when you go on the calculator, you can select the type of pension that you have, and we've kind of devised a proxy for each type of pension based on our research, and then you can apply that same proxy to your particular pension.
Awesome. And there's another question that's coming around. Some people say that zakat is covered in the income tax that we pay. What are your thoughts on that, Mufti Saab?
No, so zakat is not covered simply because income tax is being used. Tax is being used for all sorts of things, right? No, it's not only for the poor and needy. It's going to everybody, and also zakat is completely different as a system to income tax, right? The way it's used, the way it's collected, the way it's calculated. So you can't, it's like trying to equate apples to pears.
Makes sense. You get trees that can grow both apples and pears. Do you know that?
No, I didn't. But that's news. That's news to me.
Yeah, you get these crazy trees where you can get apples, pears, and then I think one other type of fruit. It's insane.
Wow, subhanallah, Allah's amazing. His creation.
Yeah. So let me take a few other questions. I want to also turn a little bit towards the things that you can deduct from your zakat, because I know we've been talking a lot about assets, but I want to talk a little bit about things like student finance and mortgages as well. But Imran is asking, can you accrue interest on a savings account with the intention of using it to neutralize interest on a student loan?
Yeah. So look, you shouldn't be doing neither, right? You should. The thing is, one wrong doesn't, allow another wrong kind of thing, right? So you should avoid interest altogether wherever it's happening, as much as possible.
That's a deep question. All right. So this one is: are you allowed to claim tax relief on zakat?
Yeah, you can, because what you're not allowed to do is, see, from a zakat perspective, you're not allowed to directly benefit from the zakat beneficiary, right? So that's a rule. So I can't take services from a poor person and then give him my zakat. Okay. Neither can I say to a person, look, I'm giving you this zakat on condition that you come and paint my house for me. So you can't do that. But when it comes to tax relief, it's not from the beneficiary, rather it's from the government and the taxation system. So it's fine. You can claim tax relief.
And Mufti, can you pay food or other kind of things as zakat, or does it have to be money?
No, you can give anything of value, whatever is valuable and has value. You can give that to poor people. Money is typically the bestest because you can do multiple things, right? It gives you the most opportunity. But you can, if you're a business which is asset rich, cash poor, you can give your stock, right? You could do that. Like I know one company, a business which had loads of medication, a pharmacy to be precise. They gave their medication away as zakat to poor people who needed those medications. So that's also possible and practical.
And now we've got a question around credit card debts, and I think this is quite a nice segue into just thinking about things that you can deduct from your zakatable assets. So they're asking if you have credit card debts on 0%, which you then transfer onto a new offer and continue this way for a while, paying a small amount monthly. How much of this debt can you deduct? And also, as one comes close to clearing the debt fully, how does one determine their zakat date?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're having to make small payments monthly, I would say that's potentially interest if you're doing that, right? You should avoid doing that. I mean, the permission to use credit cards is based on a person being confident of not paying interest, right? So if you're using balance transfer cards and you're moving things around, yeah, the transfer itself might be okay depending how it's structured. It's because it's like an admin type fee, but even that can be. There's also a discussion around the payment, whether it's a fixed payment or percentage payment, right? We don't want to go into that right now, but we should avoid paying any form of interest. And when it comes to zakat, though, you can deduct the full balance that's due, right? And that's because the idea is by deducting that, you'll be paying the money to pay off the debt, right? So you're not paying zakat on that. So the money that's left over, you can use it to pay off the debt.
Makes a lot of sense. So you shouldn't deduct it, the entire amount, and then just carry on paying small amounts.
Exactly. You shouldn't do that, no.
Yeah. Musab, couple of quick questions, conscious of the time as well. One is around student finance and how to deduct that, if at all. And then the other one is around mortgages, both conventional and Islamic, because lots of people will have them, and they often ask this question about, how much can I deduct?
Yeah, so I mean, look, with student finance, because it's taken out from your gross pay, right? I've never understood really the concept of deducting student finance unless you're saving up to make payments, right? I can understand that in your calculation, but it's something you never have to physically pay yourself. It's just being deducted from your wage anyway, right? So it's something which is like something which I'm not really too clear on, right? My advice to people is when it comes to student finance is you don't deduct it. But yeah, if you are saving funds to pay off student finance, that can be deducted because now you have money with you, which you've designated to pay off a debt.
And with Islamic mortgages and conventional mortgages, we had a bit of a debate earlier as well. How how should we approach that? I think from memory, with Islamic mortgages, you want to deduct the 1 month of rent that is due, but not the capital. And then with conventional, it's a year. But I'll let you,
Yeah. So see, it's a bit tricky. So the truth, I mean, when it comes to conventional mortgages, typical advice is you deduct 1 year's worth of capital payments, not the interest, right? That's what typically is the advice. When it comes to Islamic mortgages, it's this idea of deducting 1 month's rent. But my personal view has shifted somewhat, although it's not officially shifted, but I thought it's just worth discussing this I know the 1 month view is there, but though, because you've already entered into a contract of paying rent continuously, right? It's not contingent upon usage. This 1 month idea is based on, because you're using the house now, you can deduct the house now, right? That rent is accruing with the usage of the property, like a pay as you go system, right? That makes sense, 1 month, because it's just you're using this current month, you're committed to this month. But in most of our rental agreements, if you look at it, even if you've got a short hold tenancy, you sign up for 6 months, you got to pay 6 months worth of rent, right? But it's just that they've split it across on a monthly basis. So really and truly, if that's the case and the entire amount is payable, you can't just exit the rental contract now, then the entire amount should be deductible, right? But with Islamic mortgages, the challenge comes because there's also an acquisition payment, right? And those are perceived as sales, right? Future sales. So that could not be deducted. And so you have to do this kind of like working out how much is rent, it can get a bit tricky, right? That's why I think sometimes it's easier just deducting. And the rent is usually a very small percentage, a small amount anyway, right? So it just, all I would say is, if you want to continue with that 1 month, it's fair. You could do that because that is a view of scholars. But also there is definitely, I would say, scope to consider the full 12 months of payments to deduct as well.
Brilliant. There's been a follow-up on the credit card point, which is like no interest. Just to be clear, no interest is being paid. It's all on 0% offers. So say you have a 10K debt on the cards. Can you deduct the full 10K, or can you only deduct what you intend to pay over the next 12 months?
Yeah, it's the latter, like whatever you're intending to pay. But what I would advise is, if pay off the debt as much as you can, right? So if you can pay off the full 10K, then pay off that as soon as possible. But for zakat purposes, typically if you expect the payments to stretch over 12 months, then deduct 12 months worth of payments.
Makes sense. And then there's a follow-up, which is like, once you've cleared the debt, how do you determine the new zakat date? And I guess that would just be the point when you pass the nisab again, right?
Correct.
And yeah. Brilliant. Mufti Saab, I think we are broadly at the end of the questions. Are there any final thoughts that you wanted to share with with the audience, especially given that it's Ramadan and we're thinking about zakat and sadaqah to
Yeah, look, all I would say to everybody is maximize on your recitation, reading of the Quran, and pondering of the Quran. Ramadan is synonymous with the Quran. Take out time. Just as zakah is purification for your wealth, Ramadan is purification for us, right? I heard a beautiful thing. We hear this often, that the first 10 days of Ramadan of forgiveness, next 10 days for mercy, or the first 10 days for mercy, second 10 days for forgiveness, and last 10 days for being free from the hellfire, right? But in reality, every single day is mercy, every single day is forgiveness, every single day is freedom from hellfire, right? That's the reality of Ramadan. And there's a lot to show that. So we should be really trying our best to maximize our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because look, zakat is all about that. Ultimately, zakat, sadaqah, what you're doing it for, you're ultimately doing it for closest to Allah. That's ultimately everything. That is the ultimate thing for our existence. There is no other ultimate purpose for existence. That ultimately it's a manifestation of your submission to Allah. That's what zakat is. That's what sadaqah is. That's why sadaqah means a testimony, right? Sadaqah means literally testimony, because it's a testimony of your faith and submission. So let us really maximize these days. I know typically after 3, 4, 5 days, there's a dip in our performance. We become accustomed to everything and desensitized. But let's just keep going. Have that kind of check and have goals. Have goals, right? And try to meet those goals every single day.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab, for your words and for the guidance that you've given us today, and also just your general efforts in this whole space. I think it's if you compare us as a community, I think to, let's say, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I think we've come on in leaps and bounds when it comes to the institution of zakat. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in your work, the barakah of NZF, and all of the charities and zakat organizations globally that are working on this. And folks who've tuned in late, you can catch up on this. There will be a recording sent to you if you've registered on Zoom, and also I think it will be available obviously on YouTube and the social media channels as well. So with that, let me conclude. Any questions that we haven't answered, please do feel free to drop the folks at NZF an email. There will be muftis available to answer those questions as well. So you can find out your answers there. And with that, barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.